Hello class! Today we are going to talk about special effects, and that's chapter 7 from your textbook. So let us begin. Newspaper design is a creative craft. Every paper has consistent design rules, but once established, they're made to be broken. And we've talked about the importance of breaking the rules just to add more style and creativity to a page. However, you have to be very careful about which pages you are going to be creative and which pages you're not. Most of the times, feature pages are those that allow more flexibility. So today we will focus on several elements and how you can properly use them on a newspaper layout. Let's begin with wraparounds and skews. A wraparound is the effect created when text is made to dodge text or when text should flow around a photo. A skew is the effect when text sneaks along a jagged piece of art. Both of these can be used on feature and news pages. And also both of these add flair and flexibility on a page. Now, if you decide to use skews and wraparounds, you must follow certain guidelines. So some of the principles are, you should never overdo it. Don't try to apply a wraparound for every story or have a skew on every page on your newspaper. It's just going to be too much. Make sure the text that you're using with your wraparounds or your skews, it's readable. And finally, maintain contrast. Now let's move on to cutouts. And you've actually worked with cutouts in this class. You were asked to do feature pages and center spreads, and you've seen the importance of having a cutout. Now, there are several reasons why designers use them, even though some editors and newspaper designers argue and they say cutouts are not the most ethical things to use in a newspaper because it takes away from the original um, image. However, designers use them quite a lot, and they use cutouts because they want to create a 3D type of a dramatic effect. They use cutouts because they want to eliminate distracting background. And finally, a cutout can tighten up a story, and it lets the text hug a photo central image instead of just parking it a few inches away. So it kind of combines these two elements and makes the story stronger. Now, these are the guidelines for photo cutouts. First guideline, don't change a photo's meaning or ruin its integrity. And we've talked about that. Make sure, even when you're being creative, keep the ethical principles alive. Use cutouts on features and don't use them on hard news stories because news is very strict and rigid, and you don't want people to interpret a news page and assume that that's a creative piece of art. Be especially careful when trimming faces, fingers, and frizzy hair. And I mentioned that when you work in Photoshop, try to make sure you work on those edges and they're not rough. Moreover, people have sued newspapers before or because they were missing parts of their bodies. So if you do a cutout, just make sure it looks clean and nice. Now let's move on to mortises and insets. So a mortise is the effect when one text block or illustration, a photo overlaps another. So they're placed on the top of each other, where they're kind of part of each other. An inset is the effect when one image is placed inside another. Here are some guidelines to use for insets and mortises. Overlap only into dead space. So if you have some dead space on the page, that's where you can use an overlap. Mortise only photos of different scale, and we've talked about that. There should be an image that's dominant, a visual that is larger in size, and then if you decide to have an inset or another image placed inside that image, they do not have to be of the same size. And maintain contrast between overlapping elements. Now, the next element we're going to talk about are screens and reverses. And we've touched on those during our lectures this semester, but just to remind your understanding of them. So screens are used to create background tints. If you're using a dark screen, make sure the type is reversed. So for instance, if your screen is black in color, then your type or your font color has to be white. They have to contrast, and it has to be obvious which element is what. Don't overdo it. Make sure the type is large and font. Most of the times, if you have a reversed screen, you are going to use a sans serif type font. So you're going to use an Arial type font, maybe bold, just to make sure it's readable and it's contrasting. Now let's move on to display headlines. So we've talked about the importance of having powerful headlines, but also the importance of being creative with your headlines. So remember this: ordinary news stories use ordinary headlines. When it comes to features, please be creative. This is a must. However, try not to overdo it. So remember, rules are made to be broken, but that doesn't mean you can always break the rules. Make sure your display headline matches the tone of the story. It should help your story, not hurt it. Keep it short and punchy. And finally, let's talk about color. Most of these elements that we've talked about so far, they involve some type of color. So color is extremely important in the life of a newspaper designer. Now, for decades, newspaper editors stubbornly insisted that color was fine for the Sunday funnies, but never for hard news pages. When the USA Today launched in the 80s, they decided that color isn't just decorative, it attracts readers. And they were right. Color can bring an element to life on your newspaper page. It can emphasize a story. It can separate elements and enhance readability. Plus, advertisers love color because of the fact that ads defray newsroom costs. So, color is important. But remember this quote: just because you can doesn't mean you should. Now, go easy on color. Don't use color for color's sake. Be consistent when using color and don't confuse your readers into thinking that unrelated elements go together. Some newspaper elements work in color, others don't. My suggestion is that you check the textbook for these elements and you identify which elements work good in color and which elements don't. But at the end of the day, don't guess. Don't trust what you see on your computer screen. And I've suggested that before you finalize everything in your InDesign, make sure you save a copy and you print it. And take a look on your computer version of your project and on your printed version. See the difference, because there is going to be a difference. Use a color chart that printers give you so you have a better understanding on how every color is going to look after you print it. This is it for today. Make sure you read the textbook, study the notes on Moodle, and let me know if you have any questions or concerns. And remember, creativity is wonderful, but be careful on how much you break the rules, and don't be scared to try new things, because at the end of the day, that's how great things are born. When you avoid following the same steps and you decide to come up with something new, but you should always have an argument. There should be a logic argument in why you decided to use a certain element, why you decided to have a reversed screen, or why this color works best for this headline and it won't work for another one. Thank you guys, and I'll see you next week.